We've all been there. Buying a book or a trick because it feels like it's the holy grail. The one thing standing between us and huge success as a performer. But is the latest thinking and work on a trick always the best? Or is the method largely irrelevant? There's an underlying assumption for many magicians that newer is better, that the latest books and study have truly improved the method or structure of the trick and represent the pinnacle of magic achievement. And sometimes that's the case. But often it's just what Al Baker postulated decades ago, that many a trick has been ruined by improvement. In this episode of Erudite Magic, I'm going to give you a few tools that will help you decipher the difference between something that's just the latest and greatest for the latest and greatest sake versus a true improvement. And I think that you'll save time and money in the process. Towards the end of the episode, I'm going to give you 2 questions that I always ask myself before making a new purchase. And I'll share with you my list of things that you should know to avoid gotta-have-it-itis. I'll cut to the chase. One of the big problems is that method is largely irrelevant. As magicians, peeking behind the curtain, method is almost always what we're looking at. Something cool, something different. Always looking for real magic. But the reality is the participant should never actually see the method. So as long as the method works, i.e. that it's invisible, it's irrelevant. Therefore, what we want is something that's surefire, invisible, and suitable for the purpose. And if you're still not convinced, method is so irrelevant that many of the best magicians start with no thought of method. They have an effect in their mind that they want to create, and only after they establish this framework do they go about finding a method to accomplish it. And especially if you look at some of the top tricks that have ever been performed and continue to be performed, most of them are old and performed with tried and true methods. Nothing to do with the latest and greatest. I'm talking about tricks like Triumph, Out of This World, the Ambitious Card, Coins Through Table, etc. They all have similarities. They're easy to perform, and they're easy to understand. And yet every year there are countless releases for newer versions of each of these. So how can you ensure that you're not just buying the latest and greatest that really has no benefit to you or what you're trying to achieve with your audience? I'm glad you asked that. Here are my top tips to ensure that you have the best shot at performing good magic without wasting your precious time and money on the latest and greatest just for its own sake. The first piece of advice I have is to study the basics. Understand sleight of hand, subtleties, and techniques that apply to your specific area of magic. The old adage is true, you need to learn to walk before you can run. So enjoy the walk and learn what makes your area of magic tick. If you're into cards, study something like Card College or Royal Road to Card Magic depending on your budget. Learn how to false shuffle, perform a double lift, control a card, and palm, the basics. And if you're into coins, learn a palm or two, a decent false transfer, and a vanish. Into mentalism, learn to perform a billet switch. Practice nail writing. Understand the one ahead and one behind principles. You get the picture. This step is critical to answering one of the 2 questions that I always ask myself before a purchase, which I'll come to in just a little bit. Once you know the basic moves, it's important to move on to tricks that actually utilize those sleights. And a lot of times this happens at the same time that you're learning the sleights. For example, in older texts like the Royal Road to Card Magic and even Card College is getting up there in age now, you learned a sleight and then you immediately learn tricks that utilize only sleights that you've learned up to this point. One of the best ways that I found to do this step is to study classic tricks. They're classic for a reason. They've stood the test of time and entertained thousands and thousands of people. And as previously mentioned, they're typically easy to do using basic sleights. They are the application of what you've been learning on the sleight of hand front. I already mentioned some examples, but I'm talking about tricks like Coins Across, Triumph, Out of This World, Coins Through Table, etc. I'm sure you have your own list. And I know that some magicians will protest classic tricks because they think that your audiences have already seen this. But remember, it's actually statistically unlikely that a person has seen magic performed live for them. And even if they have, they've never seen you perform these miracles. And if you take my advice and study classic tricks after you study basic sleights, you'll enter this arena confident, knowing that you have what it takes to perform it and that these tricks will entertain an audience. So tangential to studying classic tricks, you should also study classic books. I've done a whole series of books that I think that should be on everyone's shelves, and you can see that by clicking the video here in the corner, or down in the description below. Books like Stars of Magic are filled with classic material, but even the tricks that never made it into the upper echelon of magic are still worthy of your study. Tarbell is another great example because it gives you broad exposure to all kinds of magic, techniques, tricks, psychology, etc. There's a reason that the late Denny Haney used to preach, it's in Tarbell. And just studying this group of books will help you avoid rebuying something that you already know just because it's in a shiny new package. The bottom line is to study what you have. We all have lifetimes of magic on our shelves, and there's a pretty good chance that the latest thing being released is already covered by something in your library. Which brings me to the two questions that I always ask myself before I make a new magic purchase. This episode of Erudite Magic is being sponsored by Don's Magic and Books. If you don't already have access to some of these classic technique manuals or classic books, Don has them in spades. As you peruse his website, which I'll drop a link to down in the description below, you'll very quickly see that he has a lot of great deals on these types of texts that will help you improve by studying classic masters and techniques. And once you've advanced past that initial stage of dealing with the basics, you'll find that Don has a lot of out-of-print and rare gems for the collectors out there. He offers fast and free shipping along with very fair pricing, so I don't hesitate to recommend him, and I know that everyone who's learned about him through Erudite Magic becomes a lifetime customer. Don is a great guy, and you're going to love the books that you get through his website. I don't know what you're waiting for. Start shopping with Don's Magic and Books this week. Whenever I see a magic advertisement, whether it be a book or a trick, I try to view that advertisement through the lens of my own knowledge. The two questions I ask myself are, 1, how would I create the same effect with what I already know? And 2, is the effect as perceived by the audience different than what I already know? The first question tests my knowledge of classic sleights and pushes me to be creative. It's a fun exercise to keep a journal of how you would achieve the effect that you're seeing in the ad. Once you've studied classic methods and sleights, more often than not, you'll be closer to the actual solution than you think. The second question helps put the material in perspective and tests your knowledge of classic routines. For example, if you can achieve the same effect in the eyes of your audience through the Hoy book test as opposed to the shiny new $200+ book test, only you can decide whether it is worth it to make that purchase. But being critical about how your audience will perceive it will help you save money. And it's incredibly powerful to have knowledge of what other effects would give your audiences the same sensation as the item you're thinking about purchasing. By asking myself these two questions before I click the Add to Cart button, I save time and money by leveraging what I already know, and it pushes me to re-explore the things that I've already bought. A win-win. Studying and knowing magic is great, but ultimately, magic is an eminently practical art. What do I mean by that? I mean that we should spend way more time performing our material than searching for the latest and greatest. And if you want to improve your mindset on that issue, I made this video to help you. As always, my friends, I appreciate you watching. And until next time, keep reading.